Hello, I'm Jim Byers and I'm here in Bennington, Vermont to show you the face of Medicaid expansion for a small town. We're going to examine some different stories with different people, individuals who depend one way or the other upon Medicaid and the Medicaid expansion. Okay, hello, we're back again talking with Vicki Lampron here about healthcare in Bennington. Vicki, you are a home health aide here in Bennington?
Yes, I work for Beata, and I have one client that I care for 5 days, 3 to 5 days a week. I'm with him one-on-one care.
So this is obviously a home health situation. Is this person, without of course going into specifics, does this person require total care? Is it just going in to do the dishes? What's going on? What services do you provide?
This person requires complete and total care. He's a wonderful, wonderful person who has an intelligence and a sense of humor. I don't know where he gets the sense of humor from. His life is so different from what you or I live. He is in bed 24/7 and can't move his body from the neck down. So anything that you or I would do for ourselves, we do for him.
Okay. Now, my understanding is that he's a Medicaid patient. Is this correct?
That's true. He is Medicaid, and he's also covered under the Medicaid expansion.
Okay. So then, from what I understand, it's working for a home health agency. Your salary is kind of dependent also on what Medicaid reimburses the company. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. My knowledge of working for Beata is when Medicaid gives a raise to what they reimburse, then I get a raise. That doesn't happen every year. It doesn't happen every 2 years, and sometimes it doesn't happen every 3 years.
Right.
So people who do my job, we honestly do it because we love people.
Okay, so this isn't what a lot of people would think, that like a home health aide is somebody that didn't graduate high school, a young kid just with their first time job.
Absolutely not. I have a college education. I graduated with an associate's degree as a medical assistant, and I worked many jobs. So I've always been in the caregiver social services field of things because that's my calling. That's my passion. And the reason I do what I do now is because I love giving to my client. I love walking in the morning and saying, "Hi, how you doing?" And he always says to me, "Okay, Vicki, what's new in politics?"
Right.
Have you seen Bernie lately?
There you go.
So it's a wonderful, it's a give and take experience for both of us. He gives to me as much as I give to him.
So how much of the economy in Bennington, because Bennington has a hospital, the veterans home, the Beata, the agency you work for, what would you estimate would be the percentage of Benningtonians who actually work in the healthcare field?
Well, it's also United Counseling Services is covered under that because they do take Medicaid also. So I can't even begin to count the hundreds of people who, without Medicaid, would lose their jobs in the Bennington.
And that's basically what I was coming to. Of course, somebody that requires total care, like your client, something would obviously be covered. But I imagine there's a lot of people that fell through the cracks before expansion and would fall through the cracks again without the expansion. Would that be your experience?
Yeah, and it would also be my client. Because without the Medicaid expansion, he wouldn't be able to get services in his home. He would have to go into a nursing home. He'd have to leave the home that he grew up in. He's a young man. He's 27 years old. He would have to leave the home that he grew up in, leave his family, leave his wonderful little dog. He would have to move away from everything that he knew to go into a nursing home, which is about 3 times more expensive than what costs through Medicaid to keep him in his home.
If you could talk to Mitch McConnell or Paul Ryan, what would you ask them?
Well, I would look Paul Ryan in the eye and I would say, "Paul Ryan, I want you to come to work with me. I want you to meet the man that I care for, and I want you to tell him, no, you can't have this anymore.
Thank you. We're talking with Vicki Lampron. Thank you very much for all that you do.
Thank you.
Hello, we're here today with Darren Gordon and Vicki Lampron.
Good morning. I'm
Hello.
Vicki.
I'm Darren.
Darren is a wonderful young man whom I've come to know quite well. Darren, would you tell these folks about yourself, your name, your age?
Before we start, Darren, we do have your permission to videotape this, right? And send it to the Congressman in Washington, D.C.?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you, sir.
So my name is Darren Gordon. I'm 27 years old. I have a disorder called spinal muscular atrophy. I've had it since I've been about 2 years old. Basically means my muscles weaken as I progressively get older.
So Darren, what does that mean for yourself? Like right now, what does your day look like? Can you brush your own teeth?
No, I can't really do much of anything on my own. I pretty much need help with any day-to-day activities that most people might take for granted, like putting on clothes, going to the bathroom, as embarrassing as that is. But I can't do much these days without the help of someone like Vicki here, who's my caregiver.
Okay, Darren, one thing I've noticed is, fortunately we are here in your room, so you do have at least some degree of independence still, I assume because of Vicki being your caregiver here at home, and that's because of Medicaid expansion?
Yeah, so with my Medicaid, I'm allowed to have, a set amount of hours for caregivers such as Vicki, to come in here and help take care of me, so I can stay home and, be here with, my father and, be a part of the community and the neighborhood and have my friends and stuff come visit me all the time.
Darren, is what happened to you, it started at 2 years old, so obviously it's not something you did, because a lot of people talk about, well, if they got cancer because they smoked, or they're overweight and so of course they're going to have high blood pressure. Obviously this is nothing that you did, it just happened, correct?
Correct. I don't have any control over it, obviously. Just a random chance in my parents' genetic makeup, I suppose.
And so I'm going to ask this question, Darren, to both you and to Vicki. What happens if Medicaid expansion goes away and then a caregiver like Vicki can't come here? What would happen to you then?
So, if I would go without a caregiver, I'd have to rely on, my parents, who both work 40-hour-a-week jobs, so I wouldn't be able to get as much focused care. I wouldn't be able to be adjusted, and because I'm bedridden most of the time due to my disease, I wouldn't be able to be moved, and I'd probably start to develop more pressure wounds and such like that. And once that happens, I'd probably have to be moved to a more permanent nursing home type situation. But even then, I'm happy here. I'm here. I have a laptop. Even though I can't do many of the things most people can do, when I have my support, I can still be helpful and I can still contribute to society. I build web pages for people. I have a lot of experience in programming. I'm not just some dead weight to society. I can still contribute, and that's because I'm able to live in my home and have the care I get.
Well, I know one way that you've contributed to society, and probably because of your computer savvy, I guess you've actually taught Vicki about Marvel Comics and the joy of Marvel movies.
That was purely by accident, and I'm sure she doesn't regret it.
No, I don't. But now I stay up late watching episode after episode of Iron Man and Arrow, the Arrow.
And I bring that up because You know, a lot of us take for granted the routine of our day as maybe I'll go out to the store or something like that. And for you to expand your world, it is computer access, it is internet access, it is the interactions with outside people. Is that correct?
My whole world is pretty much accessed through my computer. I'm pretty much unable to go outside, at a whim. I can't really go to the movies. Just everything is with my computer. I'd pretty much be lost without it.
So what I'm going to do, Darren, with your permission, this is your world. Is it alright if I pan around at least show them the Chuck Norris poster?
Sure.
Thank you. So, I find Darren to be an exceptional young man, and maybe that's because him and I both have an affinity for Sir Chuck Norris. And Chuck says, if at first you don't succeed, you're not Chuck Norris. Well, Darren may not be Chuck Norris, but he does succeed. Darren, I want to thank you very much for your time in your interview today.
Thank you.
Hello, we're here with Jeanne Raynor, and today we're talking about the Veterans Home here in Bennington, Vermont. Your experience with that, I believe you did have a family member, your father, that went in for care there.
Yes.
So what was his diagnosis, Jeanne?
His diagnosis was Alzheimer's and eventually congestive heart failure.
How old was he when he went in? Where did he serve? Was he Korea?
He was World War II. He was a Navy vet. He was second lieutenant, in the Navy in World War II. Served in the Pacific Theater.
I understand that can be a very stressful situation, being the primary caregiver for somebody with Alzheimer's.
Right.
Of course, as we all do know now, it is a progressive disease to where you literally watch your loved one disappear in front of you.
Yep.
Can you talk about some of the stressors that you were going through as the primary caregiver?
Well, I started smoking again. That's after I had stopped for 25 years. So I was exhausted. I couldn't sleep because he couldn't sleep regularly. We had to stop him from driving, obviously. He got lost in the woods, and we had to call in the state police. They called in a canine unit too, and right in our own woods, which was a small parcel. And and we had to move from, as I said, from Rutland down to Bennington County to be closer to family in Massachusetts to help. So,
Okay, so then it was after the diagnosis of congestive heart failure that you had your father moved into the Veterans Home? Is that correct?
that is correct, but it was primarily because of the Alzheimer's. We had heard good things about the 2 Alzheimer's units at the Veterans Home, and did a couple of tours there while we were looking at various places. And at the point where we were doing tours, he had been in the hospital a couple of times with what turned out at that point to be congestive heart failure. So the congestive heart failure came after, many years after the Alzheimer's diagnosis, and we were able to, after one of the hospitalizations, the Alzheimer's and the congestive heart failure together required that he go into rehab. And one, we were not happy with the rehab situation where he was, and 2, it was just way too expensive, and we were losing money right and left. And so we started thinking, because he was a vet, we started thinking about the vet's home, and because we had heard such good things about the Alzheimer's units there. And so we checked them out, and he was accepted.
So You mentioned that the rehab, this obviously was a live-in rehab situation?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah.
So, and you mentioned that was prohibitively expensive.
Yes.
What was the cost like at the veterans home?
I did not handle the finances. Sorry, I can't be specific. I do know that it was less at the veterans home than it was at the rehab place. So,
They took his Medicaid, Medicare there?
yes, they took both. We had to eventually go strictly on Medicaid, but they still took the Medicaid, and which was another reason we wanted to go with the veterans home, and found out comparing excuse me, comparing the rehab place and the veterans home in terms of care for Medicaid patients. The veterans home seemed to make no differentiation. The staff made no differentiation between the Medicaid and the Medicare patients, whereas in the rehab place they did, based on our experience, just on our experience alone. But it did seem to make a big difference in the rehab place. And but at the veterans home, he was a vet. He was family. They were just unbelievably wonderful. And I am so thankful and so grateful. He was not there very long because he soon, 2 or 3 or 4 months after he went in, he came home to get into hospice. So it was not a long experience, but it was a wonderful experience for all of us. He seemed to be much less stressed out. The rooms were bigger, the rooms were brighter, the staff was just wonderful, all the way up and down the line, from food service workers to administrators, the nurses, the nurses' aides, the volunteers. It just was a wonderful experience at the veterans home.
So, almost yearly, we hear in Bennington, when the legislature meets, of course, we're always stressed out with our budgets.
Right.
So almost yearly, we hear, hey, maybe it's time to privatize the veterans home, or maybe cut out the funds altogether because it is state funded.
Right.
What would have life been like, or what would have been different if the veterans home would not have been there?
Well, without being overly dramatic, I would probably be dead because I developed more significant heart issues as a result of all of the stress with my dad. And he would have died sooner in less than happy circumstances. And I mean, Alzheimer's is not a happy diagnosis, obviously, but he was much more at peace at the veterans home. And then when he came to be in hospice, the level of stress on his face when he was at the rehab place compared to when he was at the veterans home was just worlds apart. And he seemed more at home at the veterans home. It was a home for him. And
So let me ask you about that. Were there life enrichment things that were going on at the veterans home that weren't happening at rehab?
yes, there were. I mean, they had some volunteers come in every single day throughout the day. There was a beautiful room with plants and where people would gather to have song fests. They would work on puzzles. They would do various activities. And but the respect that I cannot begin to express, the respect that everybody held for each one of the veterans there and their families. And the families were included in all the conversations, all decision making. It just was a tremendous experience. And no, it cannot be privatized. It is, it works the way it is now, and it has for years. And if that's changed, I can't begin to imagine the difference that might begin to show up. And I don't want to see that happen.
Well, this is true. One of the things that we as a nation promise our veterans is that when you come home, we'll take care of you for life. And that becomes also the end of life. And so obviously I want to thank your father for his service, but I also want to thank you for your service in taking care for him.
Don't want to be afraid, hard not to hesitate, but we can't wait.